2019 is coming to an end, and I can't help but look back at what a phenomenal year it's been. With over 20 public videos released, tons of content published on Patreon, and literally 32 million minutes watched. All Time Scary went from being an 8,000 subscriber little guy to nearly 100,000 subscribers strong in only 6 months, all thanks to you. So, to celebrate, I've decided to create a best of 2019 video compilation. I had a lot of suggestions for this in my last video, so you know what? Why not? Here are 20 of my favorite Mandela effects that we've covered this year. Just to reiterate, all of these clips are from videos I have already released. If you want to check out the full videos, links to every video are included in the description and my pinned comment. Please enjoy. This one is strange, so strange I don't even have an introduction or a thoughtful question to ask you about it. Have you ever heard of an upside down Christmas tree? Yes or no? So the answer is yes, upside down Christmas trees are a thing. The upside down Christmas trees are pine trees or fir trees that are flipped upside down so that the wider base is at the top and the smaller top is pointed downwards. In modern days, this trend caught on when holiday window displays at major stores would put upside down Christmas trees out so that more ornaments could be seen by the public. This bizarre phenomenon supposedly dates back to 12th century Eastern Europe, where the upside down Christmas tree was meant to represent the Christian Holy Trinity, somehow. Have any of you ever heard of this now popular and widely known Christmas tradition? Upside down Christmas trees just seem impractical and silly to me, yet here they are. Do you place your trees like this? Do you know anyone that does? Have you even seen this before? I never have, not once. In all the department stores, all the friends' houses, all the homes I've lived in, I've never heard of this before. Historical Mandela Effect changes are the weirdest ones to talk about, because for some people, this is a totally normal thing, and for the rest of us, it's completely unheard of. As always, let me hear your thoughts below. In the movie Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the villain of that movie, the evil queen, has a magical mirror on her wall. Inside of it is an enslaved spirit who appears as a creepy face. The spirit is basically her Siri, or her Google search engine. Here is where the Mandela Effect comes in. The evil queen at one part in the movie asked the mirror if anyone is basically prettier than her. What phrase was it that she said? Was it, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" Or was it, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" As it turns out, it's "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all." Now, here is the crazy part of this effect. Not only do a ton of people remember this as being "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all," even Disney and their officially licensed products have sometimes used the wrong quote. Pretty strange, huh? For example, look at this cup. This is a hotly contested Mandela Effect, and I'd love to hear your opinions. So as always, let me hear them all in the comments below. During the original PlayStation and Nintendo 64 era, there was an amazing Spider-Man game released called simply Spider-Man. This game featured the same artwork on all of its cases, boxes, and manuals. This was released on the PlayStation, the Nintendo 64, the Game Boy, the PC. It was all over the place. So here's the Mandela Effect regarding this. This same artwork with Spider-Man climbing up the wall is on every single thing, except for one. On the N64 cartridge, Spider-Man is now missing. The wall's still there, the background, the logo, everything's still there, but Spider-Man is gone. So here's my history with this game. I played this game on the Nintendo 64 when I was a child. I got it brand new. When this Mandela Effect first started spreading, I didn't believe it, and I went and pulled my old N64 cartridges, and sure enough, Spider-Man is missing. It's almost disturbing because it is the exact same artwork, but Spider-Man is removed. Why? The best guess I could find online was that it possibly had to do with licensing, and they had to pay for every time Spider-Man was printed. But that argument falls apart because that would mean that they put Spider-Man on the manual, but not on the game's actual cartridge. It makes no sense. All around, this one is really bizarre, and personally freaked me out because I got this game brand new back in the day. I remember him climbing up the wall, and now he's no longer there. What about you? It seems like we're heading back into the woods with this new Mandela Effect. In a previous video, I talked about how the Great Smoky Mountains is now missing an E. But this time we're talking about a different Smokey. This time we're talking about Smokey Bear. And yes, I know that's another Mandela effect in and of itself. Plenty of people remember Smokey the Bear, but now it's simply Smokey Bear. But enough with the tangents and history lessons. Here's number 4. Does Smokey Bear wear suspenders? Yes or no? I want you all to visualize Smokey Bear. He's standing up straight with a park ranger hat on, a shovel in one hand, and he's pointing at you. Only you can prevent forest fires, he says. In this visual, do you see suspenders or not? Well, now he doesn't wear suspenders, and never has. It's fascinating if you're one of us that remembers the suspenders. Let me guess, they were red, right? It's exactly what I remember. Upon doing my research for this one, I found a few pieces of residue regarding this Mandela effect. Here are pictures that I found showing that I am not alone in remembering these suspenders. How is it possible that so many of us remember this? Remember this small little detail that seemingly never existed? It's troubling to say the least. So, as always, let me hear your thoughts in the comments below. Reading through the thoughts and memories of different commenters is always my favorite part of these videos. Think back to when you learned about World War I and World War II. Visualize the massive warships that were utilized back then. Now, what color were those ships? Were they covered in abstract designs, or was it solid colors like gray? What do you remember learning? Abstract colors and shapes, or solid colors like gray? In World War I, and to a lesser extent in World War II, to avoid ship destruction at the hands of German U-boats, ships were painted in Dazzle camouflage. This is actually how history goes now, believe it or not. The hulls of Dazzle ships were covered in stripes, swirls, colors, and abstract shapes, reminiscent of Pablo Picasso's work. The idea was that the overwhelming mix of colors and shapes would confuse enemy U-boats looking through a periscope, thus making it more difficult to gauge the size, speed, and direction of these Dazzle ships. Despite other people's memories, including my own to the contrary, this was a common practice. It started in Britain, but eventually spread to the US. It turns out that Dazzle ships were surprisingly effective. So much so that during World War II, Dazzle camouflage was utilized again by the US and even used on the decks of ships to confuse enemy aircrafts. Does any of this sound right to you? Growing up on the East Coast and being a big history buff, I've even visited some of these ships. But amazingly, I've never seen one in full Dazzle paint, let alone any mention of this throughout history. So all of my education, all of my personal studies, all the documentaries and movies and things that I've watched, nothing. What do you all think? Is this exactly as you learned it? Or is this something completely confusing to you? Maybe you're something in between. Whatever you feel, let me hear it in the comments below. I'm so excited to read what you all think about this. Al Capone, also known by the nickname Scarface, is one of America's most famous gangsters back during the Prohibition era. This rich and powerful businessman, as he called himself, was also the boss of the Chicago Outfit, aka the Chicago Mob. Al Capone reigned supreme for 7 long years before the US government finally took him down. It wasn't for his crimes of extortion, murder, robbery, or bootlegging that took him down. It was tax evasion. In 1931, Al Capone was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in prison, but he was only imprisoned for 8 years. Here is where the Mandela Effect comes in. What happened to Al Capone? It's a widely known fact today that when he entered prison, he had syphilis, which remained untreated for the vast majority of his stay. By the end of his life, he was actually diagnosed as having the mental age of a 12-year-old. So tell me, where did Al Capone die? Was it in Alcatraz prison, or was it in his home in Florida? I am one of the many people who were taught that Al Capone had died in prison. Well, it turns out, after 8 years of incarceration, he was paroled in 1939, and he actually lived on for 8 more years after his prison sentence. What did you remember? And get this, Al Capone spent his last years of his life at his mansion in Palm Island, Florida, spending time with his wife and grandchildren. Then, because of complications of syphilis, he eventually suffered, yet survived a stroke, but then not long after, he died of cardiac arrest. This timeline is drastically different than the one that I remember learning about and studying growing up. So what about you? Do you remember Al Capone dying in prison, or dying 8 years later surrounded by his family and loved ones? In the Old Testament of the Bible lies the book of Judges. In this book is the fantastically entertaining and bizarre story of Samson and Delilah. Samson was blessed by God and given ridiculous strength. The source of this strength was sought after by many of his enemies. Delilah was a woman that Samson loved, but she didn't love him. She was eventually bribed by Samson's enemies with a reward of many silver coins if she could discover the source of Samson's power. After multiple false answers from Samson, he finally admitted to her that his power came from his long hair. Here is where the Mandela Effect comes in. What happens next? Did she wait for him to fall asleep and then cut his hair off? Or did she wait for him to fall asleep and order a servant to cut his hair off? It seems like a simple change, but it's been freaking out a lot of people online. Well, as it is now, she never personally cut his hair. It was a servant that she summoned that did all the cutting. So what do you think? Is that what you remember? Another bonus Mandela effect comes at the end of the story after Samson is blinded and enslaved by his enemies. Samson's hair eventually regrows, regaining him his ridiculous strength. He grabs the massive columns around him and collapses the structure down on everyone, killing himself, his enemies, and Delilah. Except now, Delilah isn't there and isn't mentioned after her betrayal of him. In this version, we're never going to know her fate. All we know is that she got a lot of silver coins and she cashed out. There was no repercussions whatsoever as far as we know for betraying God's anointed one, Samson. So what do you think? Did either of these Mandela effects hit you? What did you remember about this biblical story? Let me know in the comments below. Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo Entertainment System. Released back in 1985 in America, this title introduced millions to the classic left-to-right side-scrolling genre of video games. From the very first level, 1-1, it taught you the fundamentals of how to play Mario, as well as a ton of its gameplay features. Enemies to step on, mushrooms to collect, secrets to find, but here is where the Mandela Effect comes in. Did level 1-1 of Super Mario Bros. Have a piranha plant in it? If you're unfamiliar with what a piranha plant is, it's the sharp-toothed plant that comes out of the green pipes and tries to eat Mario. So let me ask you, the experts, did level 1-1 of Super Mario Bros. Have a piranha plant in it? Yes or no? As it is now, the very first level in Super Mario Bros. Does not actually have a piranha plant in it. This Mandela Effect recently became popular online because of a post regarding its placement in the first level. The commenter was talking about his earliest gaming memories and how it took him so long as a child to beat the first level because of the piranha plant that came out of the pipe. Amazingly enough, when it was brought up the first level didn't have a piranha plant, the thread turned to insanity. I'm curious to hear who among you remembers Super Mario Bros. With the piranha plant on level 1-1 or without. Just like my last video, I'm going to have to bring back up Disney's 1967 animated classic movie, The Jungle Book. This Mandela Effect has to do with the incredibly popular song called The Bare Necessities. I'm going to read a very specific verse, and I want you to tell me what goes in the blank. Wherever I wander, wherever I roam, I couldn't be blank of my big home. Is it fonder or is it found? Well, the lyrics that pop up when you Google search the Bare Necessity lyrics, it says fonder, so that must be right. Nope. If you watch the movie today, it now says found. Let's watch the clip and you can judge for yourself.
I couldn't be found of my big home. I couldn't be found of my big home.
Help me out, hardcore and casual Disney fans. What did you think about this change? Did that wording throw you off as much as it did me? Because for me, found doesn't make any sense. It's a there's a snake in my boots all over again. In this house lived the famous Charles Lindbergh and his wife Anne Morrow Lindbergh and their 20-month-old son, Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. The father was world famous at the time for making the first solo, non-stop transatlantic flight from New York to France. This 3,600-mile voyage took 33.5 hours to complete and brought him fame and notoriety. Unfortunately, his name will forever be tied to a much darker event. The date is March 1st, 1932. The location is East Amwell, New Jersey, the Lindbergh House. What happened here was called the crime of the century because of the mystery and the nature of the crime. Between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m., Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. was kidnapped from his upstairs nursery. A crudely drawn ransom note was left behind. This kidnapping was such a big event at the time that the President of the United States, Herbert Hoover, was notified the following morning about it. This is where the Mandela Effect comes in. What do you remember about this case? Is the Lindbergh baby still missing to this day, or was the child found? Well, if you're like me, you remember the Lindbergh baby was never found. It's a mystery that resulted in years of speculation, wild accusation, rumors of it being an inside job, and so many more theories. The mystery of what actually happened to little Charles Lindbergh continued to this day. Or at least it did. It turns out that now the Lindbergh baby was found 2 months after his disappearance, and unfortunately he was found deceased. Not only that, his kidnapper and murderer was captured, prosecuted, and eventually put to death within 4 years of the crime being committed. Upon doing more research into this, I'm not alone in my belief that the baby was never found and that no one was convicted for his kidnapping and murder. I've read numerous comments and threads of other bewildered people who are just as confused by this change as I am. So what do you think? Do you remember hearing that the Lindbergh baby was found? Or do you remember hearing that he is still missing to this day? I can't wait to hear your thoughts about this in the comments below. Do any of you remember the classic card game Uno? A lot of people have played this game since it was released in 1971, yet seemingly everyone has been playing it wrong. There are 2 popular moves in this card game that everyone seems to know and has used before, but actually have never been in the Uno rules and aren't legal within the game. Somehow though, seemingly everyone knows them and has used them throughout Uno's history. Recently, the official Uno Twitter account has been calling people out over these 2 moves and claiming that they have never been in the rules and that they've never been allowed before in Uno. Bizarre, right? Let me break down the 2 rules and you can tell me if you remember them. The first rule is stacking, which is when one player puts down a draw 2 card, then the next player, instead of drawing 2, places their draw 2 card on top of it and it gets passed down to the next player. So the next player would have to draw 4 instead of 2. So that is called stacking and can go on indefinitely until the last player who can't stack has to draw that many cards. Turns out that has never been allowed, yet everyone has used it. Strange, huh? The second popular Uno move that has never once been allowed in the rules is essentially drawing cards until you get the card you need. Supposedly, if you don't have the right card, you only need to draw 1 card and then end your turn. I can't be the only one out there who remembers dozens of hilarious games where you or someone else had to keep drawing until they got the card that they needed, sometimes even forcing their hand to grow to over 20 cards. This is a major Mandela effect for me because that rule now, that doesn't exist, that was my favorite part of Uno growing up. That's why I love that game. I loved watching people have to stack and draw and draw and draw. So tell me in the comments, do you remember doing either of these 2 things? If so, how is it possible that so many of us across America and potentially the world played the same game, the same way, with the same rules, yet those rules never existed? Remember the Salem witch trials? Tell me, how were the witches executed? Was it being drowned? Or was it burnt at the stake? What do you remember? Most seem to remember them being drowned or being burnt at the stake. Not anymore. Now history tells us that it was neither of those, that they were actually hung. In 1692, the suspicion of witchcraft had run rampant in America and reached a fever pitch in Salem, Massachusetts. A group of young women claimed that others were practicing witchcraft, and so began the infamous Salem witch trials. By the time the trials had come to an end, over 150 men, women, and children had been accused, and 19 were executed. How were they executed? Again, most of us remember the witches being drowned or being burnt at the stake, but it turns out that wasn't the case. All of the Salem witches were hung, apart from one male, who died after being pressed under stones for refusing to confess. So tell me what you think. I had always believed that they were burnt alive, but that seemingly never happened in America. Is this a Mandela effect for you too? So if you've already seen my 4 New York Mandela Effects video, you have already heard of the Black Tom explosion. If you haven't seen that yet, please definitely go check it out. The reason I bring it up in this video is because that is an example of history being changed. And because of that change, other aspects of time and history have been changed as well. With this Mandela Effect, it's going to be another example of that. On June 1st, 2008, there was a major fire that broke out in Universal Studios in Hollywood, California. This major fire burnt down the King Kong theme park attraction and a bunch of previously preserved video content. Now, in 2019, a huge amount of articles and videos just released announcing that an estimated 500,000 popular song masters going back 6 decades were also all destroyed. Here is where the Mandela Effect comes in. None of the artists, musicians, producers, or mixers knew about this. Not a single one. These poor musicians are finding out for the first time that their master recordings were destroyed 11 years ago. Now, legal action is being sought by a number of artists. So, how is it possible that this massive media corporation, Universal Music Group, was able to conceal this major devastating loss for over a decade? That's one of the big mysteries of all of this, and I think that's why it ties back into the Mandela Effect. But before we get to that, these aren't simply small bands and artists either. We're talking about REM, Tom Petty, Jimmy Buffett, Aerosmith, Nirvana, Al Green, Eminem, Elton John, 50 Cent, No Doubt, 9 Inch Nails, Tupac, even Snoop Dogg. Thousands and thousands more. Here's what is so confusing to me. Over 500,000 of these masters were lost, but not a single artist requested access to their original masters over the 11 years. No one sampled any of those clips in 11 years. No one ever happened to look inside the vault containing priceless amounts of music, even once, over the course of over a decade. I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. This feels exactly like the Black Tom explosion, where history has somehow been rewritten, retconned, and now we all have to adapt to the strange change in history that no one noticed or talked about for 11 years, but now we all know to be true, somehow. To quote one of the articles I read, the scale of the losses is staggering. Upon digging in deeper into this, I actually found some other interesting facts. For one, all the way back in 2008, after the fire, most of the news reports focus exclusively on the loss of the video vault. And the New York Times even went as far as saying the blaze was a close call, and only a few video and television images were lost. In no case was the destroyed material the only copy of a work. That's a pretty bold statement considering now over 500,000 popular songs masters were burnt up and destroyed. So many, in fact, that they don't even have a full collection list of what was destroyed. The last little bit of this fascinating Mandela Effect I'm going to share with you are some of the reactions by some of the artists that were actually affected by this. The biggest disaster in the history of the music business was only discovered 11 years after the fact. What do you think? Is it possible that a major corporation hid this information for over 11 years, not only from all the news media, but from the thousands and thousands of artists who made the music? Sure, it's possible, but highly unlikely. To me, it feels like history can sometimes change. And when I say history, I mean the past, the present, and the future. It's a scary thought. But here's yet another example of that phenomenon. I can't wait to read your comments. Some of y'all are going to say it's crazy. Some of y'all are going to say that's amazing. Some of y'all will agree. Some of y'all will disagree. But that's okay. I love the discussion. I love the conversation. And I want to hear what you have to say. The last Disney Mandela Effect I'd like to talk about today is one that a ton of us remember, but seemingly doesn't exist. What is it? Well, it's a specific intro that we can no longer find online. And for all intents and purposes, it does not exist anymore. So did it ever exist? Remember that classic blue background with the castle and the words Walt Disney Pictures on it? Well, above the castle, there is a line drawn across. In this intro, instead of it just filling in itself, it's actually created by Tinkerbell from Peter Pan. Tinkerbell would fly across the screen, creating the line with her pixie dust, and ultimately dotting the I in Disney. This specific clip, as far as we know, can't be located, or at least no one has found it that has come forward. Another variation is where Tinkerbell taps the letter, nothing comes out, so she shakes her wand, or she taps it in frustration before finally getting it to work. Do you remember either of these? Some people out there have found intros that are slightly similar, but aren't exactly right. So what gives? I wish I had the answers, but I really don't. Online you can find entire Disney intro compilations from over the years, but these are specifically still missing. The weirdest part is that so many of us remember these intros. Are they from movies? TV shows? Perhaps a lost Disney special that we all happened to see back in the day? We may never know. If you find anything or figure anything out, be sure to let all of us know in the comments below. Sorry that this Mandela Effect doesn't have an option to choose from. It's simply one of those with little to no residue, so there really isn't anything to compare it to. For our final Mandela Effect, we are looking at the classic song Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. Right before the chorus starts, there's a verse that says, "People always told me, be careful of what you do, and don't go around breaking young girls' hearts. And blank always told me, be careful who you love." What goes in the blank? Is it mother always told me, be careful who you love? Or is it mama always told me, be careful who you love? I don't know what you chose, but the answer is indeed mother, not mama. So it's mother always told me to be careful of who you love, not mama always told me to be careful of who you love. I originally heard of this in a subreddit, and I had to play the song right away to hear if it actually was mother. It turns out it is indeed mother. Is that what you remember? I'm super curious to hear what everyone says in the comments below. When did the carrying of the Olympic flame begin? I'll give you a second to think about this. What year was it? From what I always understood, this has existed as long as the Olympics have. That the ancient Greeks considered fire to be a divine element, a symbol connecting mankind and the gods. Back then, a flame burned permanently at the altar of Zeus and Hera, the same place where the Olympic flame is ultimately brought to today. But no. The Olympic flame relay began in 1936 in Berlin, Germany. Yeah. I don't remember this at all. What about you? As it is now, the Olympic torch relay was nothing more than Nazi propaganda. So tell me in the comments below, does that sound right to you? Was the first Olympic torch relay started in 1936? Or do you remember it being there since the beginning? I can't be the only one. The majestic orca whale, also known as the killer whale, is one of the most recognizable mammals in the ocean, perhaps only rivaled by the great white shark. Today's first Mandela Effect has to do with the design and pattern on the killer whale. Does something look a bit off to you, or is everything normal in this photo? Perhaps I changed something, or perhaps I did not. So here's my question. Has the killer whale always had a mustache pattern on the back behind its dorsal fin? Yes or no? These photos have not been altered by me in any way. That strange mustache pattern on the back of the killer whale, well, turns out it's always been there. When I first heard of this Mandela Effect, I quickly Googled as many images of killer whales and orca whales as I could find. And as it turns out, it has indeed always been there. Does this strange mustache-looking shape look right to you? Do you remember this design on Free Willy's back? Please let me hear all of your thoughts in the comments below. The next two Mandela Effects are from the 1939 live-action movie, The Wizard of Oz. And no, I'm not talking about the Mandela Effect where Scarecrow is, for some unknown and mysterious reason, carrying a pistol around. The Mandela Effects I'm talking about today are related to Dorothy. The first one is Dorothy's shoes. I want you to visualize them in your head. What details do you remember about them? Are they red with bows, or are they red without bows? I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about it. I vividly remember them being bright and shiny red shoes. No bows, no extra nonsense on them. But that isn't the case anymore. Now they have these big red bows on top. Does that sound or look right to you? I can't be alone in this thought. The date is May 6th, 1937, Lakehurst, New Jersey. The German airship, the Hindenburg, is the largest object ever to soar through the air. While attempting to land, the massive Zeppelin caught fire and exploded. Within 30 seconds, the German airship was no more. This horrible tragedy was famously captured on film, and because of this film disaster, the age of the commercial airship travel had come to an end. Now, here is the Mandela Effect. Of the 97 passengers and crew, how many died? To me, the answer has always been obvious. Everyone on board died that day. Within 30 seconds, the Zeppelin burnt up and crashed. There was no way anyone could have survived that fiery crash, but that isn't the case now. Despite the footage agreeing with what I remember, amazingly enough, 62 of the 94 passengers and crew survived. Somehow. This horrifying disaster took the lives of 35 people, 13 passengers, 22 crewmen, and one member of the ground crew who was trying to help the Hindenburg land. What do you remember about this? Did everyone on board perish, or did 2/3 of the people on board mysteriously survive this blazing inferno after a massive drop? If so, how? Even on History.com, under an article titled The Hindenburg Disaster, 9 Surprising Facts, the first surprising fact to them is that the, quote, survivors of the Hindenburg disaster far outnumbered the victims. Why would that be surprising if that's exactly what happened? We would have known that news back in that day in 1937, at most a couple days afterwards. My takeaway is that even the author assigned to do that article was shocked by this historical change. Another interesting detail is that despite the Hindenburg explosion in 1937 being known by many, myself included, as history's deadliest airship accident, it is actually the 3rd deadliest now. It turns out accidents from 1930 and 1933 actually surpass the Hindenburg's current death toll. It seems that history loves to rewrite itself from time to time, and this is yet another example I've talked about on this channel. So tell me, what are your thoughts on this? I can't wait to hear what you all have to say. The Black Tom Explosion. I consider myself a massive history buff who's addicted to documentaries and historical accounts of previous events and wars. I can't get enough of this stuff. So the most troubling Mandela Effect to me is what is considered the first terrorist attack in America. No, it wasn't Pearl Harbor. No, it wasn't 9/11. It was a German attack on American soil all the way back in 1916. Sound familiar? It doesn't to me. The setting is July 30th, 1916 in Jersey City, New Jersey, on Black Tom Island. Black Tom Island was a major ammunition and small arms depot providing arms to allies during World War I. 2 German agents working there posing as guards set off small fires all over the island, eventually setting off millions of pounds of explosives. This is called the Black Tom Explosion. Now, the strange part about this Mandela Effect is because it is so big and so important, it causes massive ramifications throughout time. So it not only changes this one point in history, but it changes multiple things, and we're going to get into that as we go on. The first of which is now we're told that this is the turning point as to why the US joined World War I. But I was always told it was because of the sinking of the Lusitania. So it feels like a weird retcon of history for me, but what do you think? If this was just a simple attack, sure, I could accept possibly that I'd never heard of it, but it gets stranger. The explosion was so big that it would have registered as a 5 to a 5.5 earthquake on the Richter scale. It was felt as far away as Philadelphia and Maryland. This explosion destroyed more than 100 rail cars, 13 warehouses, and left a 375-foot by 175-foot crater in the ground. The damage was estimated to be $20 million back then, which is now closer to $470 million when adjusted for inflation. Amazingly enough, only 5 people died, although thousands were injured. Now here is where New York comes into this Mandela Effect. Every window in a 25-mile radius was completely shattered, including thousands in Lower Manhattan and Times Square. The Brooklyn Bridge was shaken, but the most troubling piece of information is that the Statue of Liberty was greatly damaged as a result of the Black Tom explosion. What? Is this the Twilight Zone? The Statue of Liberty's torch-holding arm was greatly damaged by shrapnel and actually resulted in it closing down to the public, supposedly. But we'll get to that in a minute. The damage to Lady Liberty's arm and skirt was estimated to be $100,000 back then, which today would be over $2.3 million. I grew up pre and post 9/11. After that attack, terrorism is all anyone could talk about. How is it that despite that, I never once heard about the Black Tom explosion? Especially considering that the attack on the World Trade Center in 2001 was touted as being the first major attack on domestic soil. Why was the Black Tom explosion not mentioned during the extensive coverage of attacks to the US? Not a single mention. Not a single reporter or news anchor back then brought up the Black Tom explosion. There wasn't a single, "Today we remember the explosion on Black Tom Island." Nothing. There's nothing about it in the news. Even on YouTube, there are only so many videos about this topic. I'd say less than 30, maybe more than 20. The oldest of those videos is only 7 years old. Even the comments on that video were people asking, "What is this? I've never heard of this before. I was never taught this. This never happened." It's a pretty interesting read. I could very easily go on and on about this particular Mandela Effect because it fascinates me to no end. But I want to know what you think. Do you remember learning or hearing about this German attack on our country that led us to World War I? Is this a Mandela Effect for you? As always, let's hear it in the comments below. Wow, you actually watched the whole thing. That's amazing. You're amazing.